Imagine this. A billionaire CEO is about to step into a luxury car waiting outside his office. Everyone's watching, impressed. But then, out of nowhere, the janitor, a single dad in a worn uniform, yells across the lobby, "Don't get in that car." The whole company gasps. Was he crazy? Or did he just save the CEO's life? What happened next shocked everyone in the building, and it will leave you speechless. Stop. Don't get in that car. The shout cut through the air like thunder inside the grand lobby of Anderson Enterprises. The sound bounced off the marble floors, echoed against the towering glass walls, and froze every single person in place. It wasn't the voice of a manager, not a polished executive, not even a security guard. No, the words came from the most unexpected person in the building. Marcus Carter, the company janitor, a man who usually moved silently, blending into the background with his mop bucket and cleaning cart, was suddenly at the very center of attention. The lobby, moments before buzzing with laughter, conversations, and the clicking of high heels across the polished floor, went completely silent. Employees stood mid-step. Receptionists froze behind their desks. Even the security guards at the door hesitated. The only sound that remained was a low hum of the revolving doors at the entrance and the faint echo of Marcus's words still hanging in the air. Everyone turned at once, eyes wide, necks craning to see the source of the voice. And there he was, Marcus, still wearing his faded gray janitor's uniform with the Anderson Enterprises logo stitched over the pocket. His mop leaned against the wall, his bucket half filled with soapy water. His broad shoulders were tense, his face set in determination, his finger pointing straight toward the CEO of the company, Mr. Richard Anderson, the CEO, the billionaire, the man whose name was plastered on the glass tower they were all standing in. He was just a step away from sliding into the back seat of a shiny black car parked outside the doors. The chauffeur stood there, holding the door open, waiting for him to enter. Richard Anderson was a man people whisper about in hallways. Known for his sharp business instincts, his cold demeanor, and his spotless reputation for running one of the most powerful corporations in the city, he was the last person anyone would expect to be interrupted by a janitor, especially in front of an audience. And yet, there he stood, his hand gripping the polished chrome handle of the car door, his brow furrowing as he turned to look back toward the lobby. His piercing blue eyes met Marcus's, filled with confusion and a spark of irritation. The employees looked from Marcus to the CEO, terrified of what would happen next. No one in their right mind interrupted Richard Anderson, let alone yelled at him. One young receptionist gasped and whispered to her co-worker, "He's done for. He just cost himself his job." Another executive muttered under his breath, "What on earth is he thinking?" But Marcus didn't flinch. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like a drum in his chest. Yet he kept his eyes locked on the CEO. Inside his head, a storm was raging. What if I'm wrong? What if I just embarrass myself in front of the entire company? What if I lose my job today? But stronger than his fear was another thought. What if I'm right? Marcus had seen something that nobody else seemed to notice. Something about that car didn't sit right with him. The driver's nervous eyes, the lack of a company logo, the way the engine had been idling too long. He couldn't explain it fully, but every instinct in his body screamed that something was wrong. So, against every bit of logic, against the risk of losing everything he worked for, he had shouted those 6 words, "Don't get in that car." The silence that followed was unbearable. Seconds felt like hours. Mr. Anderson finally spoke, his deep voice cutting through the tension. "What did you just say?" Marcus swallowed hard, but refused to back down. His voice shook slightly at first, but he repeated, louder this time, "Don't get in that car, sir." Now, the entire lobby was buzzing with whispers. Phones were being lifted subtly, some employees already recording, sensing something dramatic was about to unfold. Others covered their mouths in shock. Security shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they should drag Marcus out for shouting at the CEO or wait for instructions. And then something unexpected happened. The driver of the black car, who had been standing calmly with the door open, suddenly stiffened. His eyes darted left and right as though he had been caught off guard. In an instant, he slammed the car door shut, rushed to the driver's seat, and pulled off on the curb so quickly the tires screeched against the concrete. The car roared away, disappearing into the busy street. The lobby erupted into chaos. Gasps filled the air. Employees rushed to the glass windows, pointing at the car speeding off. The security team scrambled toward the exit, shouting into their radios. Mr. Anderson's eyes narrowed, his face shifting from confusion to something much more serious. Slowly, he turned back toward Marcus, who stood rooted in place, unsure if it just saved the CEO or destroyed his own life. The janitor's palms were sweaty, his knees felt weak, and for a moment, he considered running. But then he remembered his daughter, little Lila. He remembered her smile when she said, "Daddy, you're my hero." Those words replayed in his mind, giving him the courage to stand tall. Mr. Anderson finally stepped back inside the lobby, adjusting his suit jacket. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, giving him a clear path to Marcus. Each click of his polished shoes against the marble floor echoed like a countdown. Employees held their breath, waiting for the explosion. Would the CEO fire Marcus on the spot? Would he call security? Or would something far stranger happen? The air was thick with anticipation. Every eye in the building was locked on the billionaire and the janitor, two men from completely different worlds, standing face to face in the center of the lobby. Marcus didn't move. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. His eyes stayed locked on the CEO's, even as fear tightened its grip on his stomach. And then, in a calm but commanding voice, Mr. Anderson asked a question that would change everything. "Why did you stop me?" Life inside the company was never the same again. Marcus, once just a janitor that people overlooked, had become a symbol. Employees whispered his name in the cafeteria, telling new hires about the night the janitor saved the CEO. But for Marcus, none of it was about fame. He still picked up his daughter from school every day. He still cooked her dinner, read her bedtime stories, and reminded her that kindness and courage mattered more than money or status. Richard Anderson, true to his word, gave Marcus a position as head of personal security, along with a salary that changed his family's life forever. He also made sure Lila had a scholarship waiting for her, so her dreams would never be limited by circumstance. One evening, months later, Marcus walked past the same polished floors he once mopped at night. But this time, he wasn't invisible. Employees stopped to greet him, shook his hand, even thanked him. And as he looked at his reflection in the glass doors, Marcus smiled faintly. He was no longer just a janitor. He was a father, a protector, and a man who proved that courage could come from the most unexpected places. The lesson, the story of Marcus Johnson, reminds us all one thing. True strength doesn't come from titles, wealth, or the clothes you wear. It comes from the choices you make when everything is on the line. The janitor who yelled, "Don't get in the car," wasn't crazy. He was a father who trusted his instincts, and that decision changed everything. And sometimes, the people we overlook turn out to be the heroes we need the most. So, what do you think? Was Marcus just lucky, or was he destined to be at the right place at the right time? Either way, his story shows us that courage can change lives, not just yours, but everyone around you. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss more inspiring stories like this one. And remember, sometimes the people you least expect are capable of the greatest acts of bravery. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. The following weeks transformed Marcus's life completely. He was no longer the invisible janitor sweeping hallways at night. He was now part of the CEO's inner circle, trusted with responsibilities that carried real weight. But with that trust came real danger. Whispers of a threat. One Monday morning, Captain Reed called Marcus into the security briefing room. The atmosphere was tense, the blinds drawn, folders stacked high on the table. Reed's voice was low and serious. "We've intercepted some chatter. Someone's targeting Anderson. We don't know who yet, but it's organized and deliberate." Marcus's stomach sank. "Targeting? You mean?" "Yes," Reed interrupted grimly. "Assassination. Kidnapping. We don't know the plan yet, but it's real. The boss is at risk." The room fell silent. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't a training exercise. This wasn't a test. This was life or death. Reed looked straight at Marcus. You're new. You're untested. But the boss trusts you. You'll be on tonight's detail. Marcus nodded, though fear clenched his chest. What if I fail? What if this time instincts aren't enough? But another thought cut through the fear. If I don't do my job, the man who gave me this chance could die. I can't let that happen. The gala, that evening. Richard Anderson attended a high-profile gala downtown, hosted in a glass-walled ballroom, with chandeliers glittering above the crowd. Powerful figures filled the room. Politicians, investors, celebrities. Cameras flashed as waiters in white coats carried trays of champagne. Marcus stayed close to Anderson, scanning every corner, every face. He wasn't just looking at the obvious. He was watching the subtle details. A hand lingering too long inside a pocket. A guest who avoided eye contact. A waiter who moved against the flow of the room. Every nerve in Marcus's body was on edge. And then he saw it. Near the entrance, 2 men in catering uniforms slipped inside, carrying a large case. But Marcus noticed there were no catering trays inside. Just something heavy, metallic. His instinct screamed. Sir, Marcus whispered firmly to Anderson, we need to move. Now. Anderson frowned. What is it? No time. Trust me. Chaos unleashed. In that instant, one of the men unlatched the case, revealing a weapon. Marcus shoved the CEO down just as the first shot cracked through the ballroom. Glass shattered. Guests screamed. The orchestra stopped mid-song, instruments clattering to the ground. Panic erupted. Gun! Gun! Voices cried. Security scrambled, rushing to shield the guests. But Marcus was already moving. He pulled Anderson behind an overturned table, shielding him with his own body as bullets tore through the room. Stay down! Marcus barked. The 2 armed men advanced, firing wildly. But Marcus's eyes locked on their movements, calm, sharp, focused. He spotted the split second when one reloaded. That was his chance. Marcus lunged forward, tackling the man to the ground. The gun skidded across the marble floor. They wrestled violently, but Marcus fought with raw determination. With a final strike, he knocked the attacker unconscious. The second man raised his weapon, but Captain Reed fired from the balcony, dropping him before he could aim again. Silence fell, broken only by the sobs and gasps of terrified guests. The aftermath. Richard Anderson slowly stood, brushing shards of glass from his suit. His face was pale, his breathing shaky, but he was alive. He turned to Marcus, who was still catching his breath, blood trickling from a cut above his eyebrow. You saved me, Anderson said quietly. Marcus shook his head. No, sir. I just did what anyone would have done. But Anderson stared at him with something deeper than gratitude. Not anyone, Marcus. You. Around them, guests began whispering. Some even clapped. The story spread like wildfire across the ballroom. The janitor turned bodyguard had just saved the CEO's life. A company change. The next morning, the entire company buzzed with the news. Reporters swarmed the building. Headlines blared across the city. CEO survives assassination attempt thanks to employee. Hero janitor stops attack at gala. For years, Marcus had been invisible, just another worker mopping the floors. Now, he was the man everyone was talking about. Employees who once ignored him now greeted him with respect. Some even looked at him with awe. But Marcus didn't let it go to his head. He knew this was about fame or recognition. It was about survival, loyalty, and doing the right thing when it mattered most. The CEO's decision. Later that day, Anderson called Marcus into his office. The CEO stood by the window, staring out at the skyline, his expression thoughtful. Marcus, he said slowly, I owe you more than my life. I owe you the future of this company. If I had died last night, thousands of jobs, families, and dreams would have collapsed with me. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Sir, I don't need thanks. Anderson raised a hand. No, you need recognition. From this day forward, you're not just part of the security team. You're my head of personal security. And your daughter, she'll never have to worry about her future again. I'll make sure of it. Marcus's throat tightened. He thought of Lila, of the night she went to bed hungry, of the years he felt like he had failed her. Now all of that was changing. "Thank you, sir," he whispered, his voice breaking. Anderson stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Marcus's shoulder. "No, Marcus. Thank you. A hero's burden." That night, when Marcus tucked Lila into bed, she hugged him tighter than ever. "Daddy," she said softly, "are you really a hero?" Marcus smiled faintly, brushing her hair back. "I don't know about that, baby. I just did what needed to be done." But deep inside, he knew the truth. Being a hero wasn't about capes or fame. It was about courage in the moment when fear told you to run. And Marcus Johnson, the single dad who once mopped floors, had chosen courage. And because of that choice, nothing in his life or the company's future would ever be the same. Marcus barely slept that night. He lay awake staring at the ceiling of his tiny apartment. His daughter Lila curled up in the bed beside him. The sound of her gentle breathing calmed him, but his mind spun endlessly. The CEO's words echoed in his head. "You're done mopping floors. I want you working with my security team." It didn't feel real. He was just a janitor, a single dad who worked double shifts to keep the lights on. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a bodyguard. He wasn't special. But then he thought of how he shouted in that lobby, how he acted when no one else did. Maybe the CEO was right. Maybe he was capable of more. Still, fear gnawed at him. What if he failed? What if he couldn't live up to expectations? What if this opportunity slipped away, leaving him worse off than before? He closed his eyes and whispered a promise to himself. Do it for Lila. Whatever happens, do it for her. The first day. The next morning, Marcus traded his gray janitor uniform for a crisp black suit. The fabric felt strange against his skin, stiff, expensive, almost like it didn't belong to him. When he walked into the building, the same employees who once ignored him now stared with wide eyes. Some whispered again, "Is that him? He doesn't even look like the same guy. Guess the rumors are true. He's on the CEO's team now." Marcus's face burned, but he kept walking. At the top floor, he was greeted by a tall, broad-shouldered man with a square jaw and a crew cut. His eyes were sharp, his stance rigid. "Marcus Johnson?" the man asked. "Yes, sir. I'm Captain Reed, head of security. The boss told me about you. Follow me." Marcus trailed behind him, heart pounding. The training room. Captain Reed led him into a private training facility hidden behind the executive offices. The room looked like something out of a military base. Punching bags, weights, tactical gear, and a shooting simulator. Marcus froze. "This is where I'll be working?" Reed smirked. "This is where you'll be learning. You've got instincts, Johnson, I'll give you that. But instinct alone don't make a professional. If you want to stay here, you'll need to prove yourself." Marcus nodded nervously. "I'll try." Reed's smirk disappeared. "No, not try. Do. The CEO doesn't hand out opportunities twice." The challenge begins. The next hours were grueling. Marcus was pushed harder than he'd ever been in his life. Hand-to-hand combat drills left his arms aching. Situational awareness tests forced him to spot threats in seconds. Even the simplest exercises, like walking through a mock crowd and identifying suspicious behaviors, overwhelmed him at first. By noon, sweat poured down his back, his muscles screamed, and his confidence crumbled. At one point, Reed barked, "Johnson, a second of hesitation can cost a man his life. Do you understand that?" Marcus nodded, gasping for breath. "Yes, sir." But inside, he wasn't sure if he did understand. He wasn't protecting just anyone. He was protecting the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the country. The stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. A moment of doubt. Later, during a break, Marcus sat on the edge of the training mat, wiping sweat from his forehead. His hands trembled. "What am I doing here?" he thought. "I'm not cut out for this. I should be pushing a mop, not guarding billionaires." Then his phone buzzed. It was a message from Lila's school, a photo of her in class, proudly holding up a drawing she made. Underneath it, the teacher had written, "Lila said she wants to be brave like her dad." Marcus stared at the words, his throat tightening. Brave. That's what this was about. Not just survival. Not just money. It was about showing his daughter that fear didn't define you. Choices did. He clenched his fists and stood up, ready for the next round. Earning respect. Over the next week, Marcus pushed himself harder than ever before. Every muscle burned. Every drill tested his limits. But little by little, something changed. His reactions grew sharper. His confidence steadied. He began spotting small details others missed. The slight twitch of a hand reaching where it shouldn't. The flicker of hesitation in a stranger's eyes. Captain Reed noticed. One afternoon, after Marcus successfully disarmed a mock assailant in record time, Reed gave him a rare nod of approval. Not bad, Johnson. Maybe you're not just a janitor after all. Marcus felt a spark of pride. For the first time, he wasn't just surviving, he was becoming. The real test. Just when Marcus started to believe in himself, the real test came sooner than expected. One evening, Richard Anderson had a late meeting with investors. Marcus was assigned to shadow him, his first real duty outside training. Everything seemed routine at first, but as they exited the boardroom, Marcus noticed something. A man in a delivery uniform standing by the service exit. He wasn't holding any package. His eyes darted nervously. Marcus's instinct screamed. "Sir," he whispered urgently to the CO, positioning himself slightly in front. Within seconds, the man reached inside his jacket. Marcus lunged forward. "Hands where I can see them," he barked. The man froze, but not fast enough. Security rushed in, tackling him to the ground. Inside his jacket, they found a concealed weapon. Richard Anderson turned to Marcus, his eyes wide. "You saw it before anyone else," he said. "Again." Marcus's chest heaved with adrenaline. His hand still shook. But deep inside, he knew this was no accident. He belonged here now. A new path. That night, when Marcus tucked Lila into bed, she smiled up at him sleepily. "Daddy," she whispered, "did you have a good day at work?" Marcus brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Yeah, baby girl. I think I did." For the first time in years, he wasn't just working a job. He was building a future. And though he didn't know what challenges lay ahead, one thing was certain. The janitor who once shouted, "Don't get in the car," was no longer invisible. He was becoming someone nobody could ignore. The next morning, Marcus expected life to return to normal. He thought he'd quietly slip back into his janitor's uniform, mop the floors, empty the trash, and pretend yesterday never happened. But nothing was the same anymore. When he walked into the lobby of Anderson Enterprises, whispers followed him like shadows. Employees who had never noticed him before now paused mid-step to glance at him. Some even nodded with respect. Others whispered his name. "Is that him?" "Yeah, that's the janitor. The one who saved the CEO. He doesn't look like a hero." "Well, he is." Marcus felt heat rise to his cheeks. He didn't like attention. It made him uncomfortable. All he wanted was to do his job, collect his paycheck, and go home to Lila. But now he couldn't escape the stares. Still, he pushed the mop forward, determined to focus. Bills didn't pay themselves. The call upstairs. Just as he finished polishing the marble floor near the elevators, a sharp voice called out, "'Cause Johnson?" He looked up, startled. A woman in a sleek navy suit stood there, her tablet clutched to her chest. She looked like she belonged in the executive offices, not in the janitor's world. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said carefully. "The CEO wants to see you," she said. Marcus froze. His stomach dropped. "The CEO, Richard Anderson, wants to see me?" He glanced down at his mop, his worn uniform, his callous hands. Surely this was a mistake. Are you sure?" he stammered. The woman arched an eyebrow. "Very sure. He asked for you by name." Marcus's heart pounded. He set the mop aside, wiped his palms on his uniform, and followed her to the private elevator. An elevator he had only ever seen from a distance. When the doors opened, he stepped inside, his reflection staring back at him in the gleaming silver walls. He felt small, out of place, as if he were trespassing a world that didn't belong to him. The CEO's office. The elevator doors opened to the top floor. Marcus's breath caught as he entered. The CEO's office wasn't just an office. It was a palace. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city skyline. A massive desk sat at the center, crafted from polished mahogany. The room smelled faintly of leather and expensive cologne. Behind the desk stood Richard Anderson. Mr. Johnson, the CEO said, his tone measured, his gaze sharp. Marcus swallowed hard. Sir, But Richard held up a hand. Sit. Marcus obeyed, lowering himself into a chair that probably cost more than his entire month's salary. His hands gripped the armrests, knuckles white. For a long moment, Richard simply studied him, as though trying to read every thought in his head. Finally, he spoke. You saved my life yesterday, he said. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I just noticed something. That's all. Richard's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but not disapproval either. No, you noticed something my trained security staff missed. You acted when everyone else froze. Do you know how rare that is? Marcus shook his head, unsure what to say. The CEO leaned forward. Tell me, Mr. Johnson, what do you want? Marcus blinked. What? I want. Yes, Richard said firmly. Most men would use this moment to ask for something. Money, a promotion, a new life. So, tell me, what do you want? The unexpected answer. Marcus hesitated. He thought of the bills stacked on his kitchen counter, the leaking faucet in his apartment, the school tuition he struggled to pay for his daughter, Lila. But when he opened his mouth, none of that came out. I want to keep my job, Marcus said softly. The CEO tilted his head, clearly surprised. That's all. Marcus nodded. Yes, sir. I'm a single dad. My little girl depends on me. I don't need anything more. Just the chance to keep providing for her. For the first time, Richard Anderson leaned back in his chair and let out a low chuckle. It wasn't mocking. It was almost impressed. You save a billionaire's life, Richard said slowly, and all you ask for is to keep mopping the floors? Marcus shrugged, his eyes cast down. It's what I know, and it's enough for me. The CEO's offer. Richard grew silent again, drumming his fingers on the desk. Then, with a sharp motion, he stood and walked toward the window. You see, Mr. Johnson, men like you are rare. You have courage, instincts, and loyalty. And loyalty is priceless. He turned back to face Marcus, his eyes piercing. So here's my offer, Richard said. You're done mopping floors. Marcus's head snapped up. Sir, you're wasted as a janitor, Richard continued. I want you working directly with my security team, effective immediately. Marcus's mouth fell open. Security? Me? Yes, Richard said firmly. I'll have you trained, properly paid. And if you're half the man I think you are, you'll rise quickly. Consider this an investment. Marcus felt the room tilt. His mind raced. A security position? With real pay? With respect? This was a chance to change his and Lila's life forever. But fear gnawed at him. I don't know if I'm qualified, Marcus admitted. Richard's voice sharpened. You qualified yourself yesterday. You saw what no one else did. You spoke up when it mattered most. That is more valuable than any resume. Marcus's dilemma. Marcus sat in silence, torn between disbelief and fear. He thought about the long nights he'd spent cleaning offices alone, the exhaustion of living paycheck to paycheck, the way his daughter sometimes asked why he had to work so hard. And now, out of nowhere, the CEO was offering him a chance to step out of the shadows. But was it too much? Was he ready for that kind of responsibility? I need time to think, Marcus finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Richard nodded slowly. Fair enough, but don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't wait forever. The exit. When Marcus left the office, his legs felt like jelly. He stepped back into the elevator, his reflection staring at him again. But this time, it didn't feel like the same man. For the first time in years, Marcus saw himself not just as a janitor, but as someone who could be more. As the elevator descended, his heart pounded with a mix of fear and hope. He thought of Lila's smile, of her small voice saying, "Daddy, you're my hero." Maybe, just maybe, it was time to start believing it. And though Marcus didn't know it yet, accepting the CEO's offer would set him on a path filled with challenges, dangers, and choices that would test him more than ever before. But it would also bring him closer to a future he never thought possible. The next morning, Marcus expected life to return to normal. He thought he'd quietly slip back into his janitor's uniform, mop the floors, empty the trash, and pretend yesterday never happened. But nothing was the same anymore. When he walked into the lobby of Anderson Enterprises, whispers followed him like shadows. Employees who had never noticed him before now paused mid-step to glance at him. Some even nodded with respect. Others whispered his name. "Is that him?" "Yeah, that's the janitor. The one who saved the CEO. He doesn't look like a hero." "Well, he is." Marcus felt heat rise to his cheeks. He didn't like attention. It made him uncomfortable. All he wanted was to do his job, collect his paycheck, and go home to Lila. But now he couldn't escape the stares. Still, he pushed the mop forward, determined to focus. Bills didn't pay themselves. The call upstairs. Just as he finished polishing the marble floor near the elevators, a sharp voice called out, "'Cause Johnson?" He looked up, startled. A woman in a sleek navy suit stood there, her tablet clutched to her chest. She looked like she belonged in the executive offices, not in the janitor's world. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said carefully. "The CEO wants to see you," she said. Marcus froze. His stomach dropped. "The CEO, Richard Anderson, wants to see me?" He glanced down at his mop, his worn uniform, his callous hands. Surely this was a mistake. Are you sure?" he stammered. The woman arched an eyebrow. "Very sure. He asked for you by name." Marcus's heart pounded. He set the mop aside, wiped his palms on his uniform, and followed her to the private elevator. An elevator he had only ever seen from a distance. When the doors opened, he stepped inside, his reflection staring back at him in the gleaming silver walls. He felt small, out of place, as if he were trespassing a world that didn't belong to him. The CEO's office. The elevator doors opened to the top floor. Marcus's breath caught as he entered. The CEO's office wasn't just an office. It was a palace. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city skyline. A massive desk sat at the center, crafted from polished mahogany. The room smelled faintly of leather and expensive cologne. Behind the desk stood Richard Anderson. "Mr. Johnson," the CEO said, his tone measured, his gaze sharp. Marcus swallowed hard. "Sir, I..." But Richard held up a hand. "Sit." Marcus obeyed, lowering himself into a chair that probably cost more than his entire month's salary. His hands gripped the armrests, knuckles white. For a long moment, Richard simply studied him, as though trying to read every thought in his head. Finally, he spoke. "You saved my life yesterday," he said. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I just noticed something. That's all." Richard's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but not disapproval either. "No, you noticed something my trained security staff missed. You acted when everyone else froze. Do you know how rare that is?" Marcus shook his head, unsure what to say. The CEO leaned forward. "Tell me, Mr. Johnson, what do you want?" Marcus blinked. "What? I want?" "Yes," Richard said firmly. Most men would use this moment to ask for something. Money, a promotion, a new life. "So, tell me, what do you want?" The unexpected answer. Marcus hesitated. He thought of the bills stacked on his kitchen counter, the leaking faucet in his apartment, the school tuition he struggled to pay for his daughter, Lila. But when he opened his mouth, none of that came out. "I want to keep my job," Marcus said softly. The CEO tilted his head, clearly surprised. "That's all?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. I'm a single dad. My little girl depends on me. I don't need anything more. Just the chance to keep providing for her." For the first time, Richard Anderson leaned back in his chair and let out a low chuckle. It wasn't mocking. It was almost impressed. "You save a billionaire's life," Richard said slowly, "and all you ask for is to keep mopping the floors?" Marcus shrugged, his eyes cast down. It's what I know, and it's enough for me. The CEO's offer. Richard grew silent again, drumming his fingers on the desk. Then, with a sharp motion, he stood and walked toward the window. You see, Mr. Johnson, men like you are rare. You have courage, instincts, and loyalty. And loyalty is priceless. He turned back to face Marcus, his eyes piercing. So here's my offer, Richard said. You're done mopping floors. Marcus's head snapped up. Sir, you're wasted as a janitor, Richard continued. I want you working directly with my security team, effective immediately. Marcus's mouth fell open. Security? Me? Yes, Richard said firmly. I'll have you trained, properly paid. And if you're half the man I think you are, you'll rise quickly. Consider this an investment. Marcus felt the room tilt. His mind raced. A security position? With real pay? With respect? This was a chance to change his and Lila's life forever. But fear gnawed at him. I don't know if I'm qualified, Marcus admitted. Richard's voice sharpened. You qualified yourself yesterday. You saw what no one else did. You spoke up when it mattered most. That is more valuable than any resume. Marcus's dilemma. Marcus sat in silence, torn between disbelief and fear. He thought about the long nights he'd spent cleaning offices alone, the exhaustion of living paycheck to paycheck, the way his daughters sometimes asked why he had to work so hard. And now, out of nowhere, the CEO was offering him a chance to step out of the shadows. But was it too much? Was he ready for that kind of responsibility? I need time to think, Marcus finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Richard nodded slowly. Fair enough, but don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't wait forever. The exit. When Marcus left the office, his legs felt like jelly. He stepped back into the elevator, his reflection staring at him again. But this time, it didn't feel like the same man. For the first time in years, Marcus saw himself not just as a janitor, but as someone who could be more. As the elevator descended, his heart pounded with a mix of fear and hope. He thought of Lila's smile, of her small voice saying, Daddy, you're my hero. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to start believing it. And though Marcus didn't know it yet, accepting the CEO's offer set him on a path filled with challenges, dangers, and choices that would test him more than ever before. But it would also bring him closer to a future he never thought possible. The moment after Marcus shouted felt like time had stopped. The sound of his own voice still echoed in his ears, bouncing off the marble walls of the lobby. He couldn't believe he had actually done it, actually yelled at the most powerful man in the building, maybe in the entire city. His heart was hammering, so hard it felt like it would burst out of his chest. His palms were slick with sweat, gripping the mop handle like it was the only thing anchoring him to the ground. The lobby was frozen. Executives who had been mid-conversation stood open-mouthed. Receptionists leaned over their desks, eyes wide. Even the security guards at the doors were stuck in place, unsure whether to act. And at the center of it all, Richard Anderson, the CEO, stared at Marcus with a gaze so sharp it could cut glass. Repeat that, the CEO's voice rumbled, low and commanding. Marcus swallowed hard. He could feel dozens of eyes on him. Hundreds, even. Phones were out, recording. This moment, this risk, was being documented forever. Every rational thought screamed at him to back down. Apologize, Marcus. Say you made a mistake. Say you thought it was the wrong car. Save yourself while you can. But he couldn't. His instincts wouldn't let him. So, with his voice steadier this time, Marcus repeated the words that had come from deep inside him. Don't get in that car, sir. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A janitor telling a billionaire what to do? It sounded insane. It sounded like career suicide. One executive whispered to another, He's finished. There's no way the CEO will let this slide. Another muttered, Crazy fool, why risk everything? But Marcus didn't hear them. His eyes were locked on Richard's, his body trembling but unmoving. The driver's reaction. Just then, something strange happened. The driver of the black car shifted uncomfortably, as if Marcus's words had landed directly on him. His hand, still holding the door, twitched, his jaw tightened, and then, in a split-second decision, he slammed the door shut and rushed back to the driver's seat. The sound of the door slamming echoed almost as loudly as Marcus's shout had. The crowd gasped again as the man climbed behind the wheel and sped off, tires screeching against the pavement. The car shot forward, weaving into traffic, and vanished into the city streets. Now the lobby wasn't just silent. It was buzzing with shock and confusion. "Wait! What just happened?" someone whispered. "Why would the driver take off like that?" Another murmured. The employees looked at one another, fear and realization dawning in their eyes. That hadn't been a normal company car. That hadn't been a normal driver. Marcus's warning had been right. The janitor's fear. But even as relief began to ripple through the crowd, Marcus wasn't relieved. His body still shook with adrenaline. His mind still raced with fear. Had he done the right thing? Yes. The car's reaction proved he wasn't crazy. But what would the CEO think? Richard Anderson wasn't a man who liked surprises. He was a man who tolerated disruptions. And Marcus had just caused the biggest disruption of all. Inside, Marcus thought of his daughter again. What if this is it? What if I just threw away the only job I had to keep food on the table for Lila? The thought twisted his stomach. But then another voice whispered in his head, the same voice that had pushed him to act. You did the right thing. Heroes do the right thing, no matter the cost. The CEO walks toward him. Richard Anderson took one long step back from where the car had been, his face unreadable. He turned, his eyes scanning the employees, the empty space where the car had fled, and finally landing back on Marcus. Then he began to walk. Each click of his shoes against the marble echoed like a drumbeat. The employees parted instinctively, creating a path straight toward Marcus. The janitor's breath caught. His hands twitched at his sides. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he stayed rooted to the spot. The CEO stopped just a few feet away. His presence was overwhelming up close. The sharpness of his suit, the intensity in his eyes, the aura of command that seemed to radiate off him. The entire lobby held its breath. The moment of truth. Marcus forced himself to meet the billionaire's gaze. He expected fury. He expected anger. He expected the words that would end his career. Instead, Richard's voice came low and controlled. Why? Marcus blinked. Sir, why did you stop me? Richard repeated, his tone steady but his eyes searching. The question caught Marcus off guard. He had braced himself for punishment, not curiosity. His throat tightened as he searched for words. I noticed things, Marcus stammered. The car didn't look right. The driver, he was nervous. The company cars always have markings. This one didn't. He swallowed hard, forcing the words out. I just knew something was wrong. The CEO studied him for a long, heavy moment. The crowd stayed silent, straining to hear every word. Courage over fear. Marcus's knees threatened to buckle under pressure. He had never felt so small, so exposed. Yet even as fear gripped him, he stood tall. He refused to look away, because deep down he knew, if he had stayed silent, if something terrible had happened, he would never forgive himself. He would never be able to look his daughter in the eye again, and that truth gave him strength. For once in his life, Marcus wasn't just a janitor. He wasn't invisible. He wasn't powerless. He was a man who had found the courage to speak when no one else would. And as Richard Anderson studied him, something in the billionaire's cold, calculating eyes shifted. Something no one in that lobby had ever seen before. Respect. Richard Anderson was not just a CEO. To the employees of Anderson Enterprises, he was a legend. He was a man whose name was carved into the stone walls of the skyscraper they worked in. The man who had built an empire from nothing but an idea and relentless determination. The man who could make or break careers with a single decision. Whenever he appeared, the atmosphere in the building shifted like gravity itself had changed. That morning was no different. The CEO's entrance. From the moment Richard stepped into the lobby, the room transformed. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Phones were lowered. Chairs stopped creaking. Every sound, every movement seemed to pause in respect. He descended the wide staircase that overlooked the lobby, each step measured and confident. His tailored navy blue suit hugged his tall frame, the silk tie at his chest gleaming under the lobby chandelier. A leather briefcase hung at his side, polished to perfection, just like the man himself. There was a quiet power in his presence, the kind that made people instinctively straighten their backs, adjust their clothes, and second-guess their own importance. One executive whispered to another, "That man's not just a boss, he's a company itself." Richard didn't look at anyone directly. He never needed to. His mere presence was enough to command attention. Employees watched it with the same awe they reserve for a celebrity or a world leader. To them, he was untouchable. But what none of them realized was that, in just a few moments, this untouchable man was about to walk straight into danger. The car waiting outside. Through the massive glass doors, the sleek black car still idle at the curb, as if waiting for its king. The driver stood with his posture stiff, holding the rear door open, his face partially hidden behind oversized sunglasses. Most employees assumed the car was just another executive vehicle. After all, Richard Anderson never traveled in anything less than perfection. It was normal for a luxury car to wait for him. But Marcus, the janitor standing silently with his mop, saw the details no one else did. The way the driver's jaw tightened, the subtle twitch in his hand, the faint nervous glance he cast toward the CO as Richard approached. To Marcus, the car didn't look like safety. It looked like a trap, the crowd's admiration. As Richard strode across the marble floor, employees subtly angled themselves to catch a glimpse. Some straightened their ties, hoping he might notice them. Others whispered excitedly, speculating about the big meeting he was headed to. One young intern whispered, "Imagine being important enough that cars like that just appear for you." Another muttered back, "Imagine being so powerful you don't even have to question it." Their words dripped with admiration. To them, the sight of their CEO about to step into a sleek black car was a picture of success. To Marcus, it was a picture of disaster. Marcus's inner conflict. Marcus's grip on the mop handle tightened. His chest rose and fell as he battled with himself. "Say something," a voice in his head urged. "This isn't right. Stop him before it's too late." But then another voice whispered, "Don't be stupid. He's the CEO. You're just a janitor. If you're wrong, you'll be humiliated, then fired." Marcus's eyes darted toward the glass, then back to Richard. The CEO was only a few steps away from the open car door now. The driver gave a slight bow, trying to mask the nervousness in his movements. The seconds stretched like hours. Marcus could almost feel the weight of the choice pressing down on him. He thought of his daughter, Lila. He imagined her face if he came home one day saying he had lost his job because he yelled at the CEO. But then he thought of her words, the ones she always repeated when he told her bedtime stories. "Daddy, heroes always do the right thing, no matter what." Heroes. Marcus wasn't sure if he was a hero, but he knew what it felt like to do nothing when it mattered most. And he refused to live with that regret. The CEO nears the car. Richard Anderson reached the car, his hand extended toward the gleaming chrome handle. His expression remained calm, unreadable. To him, this was routine. Another car, another meeting, another day as the man at the top. But in that exact moment, Marcus's instinct screamed louder than ever before. It wasn't just a hunch now, it was certainty. Something was wrong. Something was dangerous. His heart raced. His mouth went dry. But his decision was made. The shout that broke the silence. Before he could stop himself, Marcus's voice exploded across the lobby. "Stop. Don't get in that car." The sound echoed off the high ceilings, cutting to the hum of the lobby like a blade. Employees gasped. Heads snapped toward the janitor standing in the corner, his mop forgotten, his body trembling but his voice firm. All eyes darted between Marcus and the CEO. Richard froze mid-motion, his hand hovering inches above the door handle. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head toward the voice. His piercing blue eyes landed on Marcus. Confusion, irritation, curiosity. A storm of emotions flickered across his face in a matter of seconds. The lobby fell into stunned silence. No one dared move. No one dared breathe. Did the janitor just yell at the CEO? Phones slipped discreetly out of pockets. Screens lit up. Employees began recording, sensing this moment would not be forgotten. Even the security guards hesitated, unsure whether to rush Marcus out immediately or wait for Richard's signal. The CEO studied Marcus for a long, tense moment. Then, in a low, commanding voice that carried across the lobby, he asked, "What did you just say?" And with those words, the balance of power in the room shifted. For the first time in years, Richard Anderson, the untouchable billionaire, was looking not at an executive, not at a board member, but at the janitor. And he was listening. The morning of the incident began like any other. To Marcus Carter, it was just another day at Anderson Enterprises, another long shift of polishing marble floors, emptying trash cans, and quietly moving through a world that often forgot he existed. The lobby was alive with its usual rhythm. The revolving doors spun nonstop as employees in sharp suits rushed inside, clutching coffee cups and briefcases. The air buzzed with chatter, the sound of heels clicking across the floor, and the faint hum of phones buzzing with emails. Marcus, in his gray uniform, stood off to the side, mop in hand, his reflection faintly visible in the gleaming tile beneath him. To most, he blended into the background, but he saw everything. He had already noticed that one of the lights in the chandelier above was flickering. He knew the receptionist had been late again. She arrived with her lipstick slightly smudged and a bagel tucked under her arm. He even knew which executives were stressed about the big quarterly meeting later that day. Their eyes darted nervously as they whispered in corners, clutching papers too tightly. But what truly caught Marcus's attention wasn't inside the building. It was outside, the strange car. Through the massive glass walls of the lobby, Marcus spotted a sleek, black luxury car idling at the curb. At first, he didn't think much of it. Cars like that were common in front of Anderson Enterprises. Client, investors, and VIPs often arrived in vehicles worth more than Marcus made in a year. But as his mop glided across the floor, his eyes kept drifting back to that car. Something about it didn't sit right. For one, it had been sitting there for far too long, engine running, faint exhaust curling into morning air. The driver didn't step out to check his phone or stretch his legs. He just sat there rigid, his hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. When the driver finally did get out, Marcus noticed more details. He wore a sharp black suit, but it didn't fit quite right, almost as if it had been borrowed. His sunglasses were too large, covering half his face. And when he scanned the area, his eyes darted back and forth quickly, like a man hiding something. Marcus frowned. Years of hardship had given him instincts most people ignored. He had learned to trust those instincts, the employees' assumptions. Inside the lobby, employees began to notice the car too. But unlike Marcus, they saw nothing suspicious. Instead, they saw opportunity. "Wow, must be a new investor," one whispered excitedly. "I bet he's here for the CEO." Another said, adjusting her blazer. The receptionist leaned forward, her voice dripping with curiosity. "Do you think this means another big deal?" Marcus listened, silent, but his gut screamed the opposite. Something about that car was wrong. The CEO's entrance. Then came the sound that always signaled a shift in the building's atmosphere. The steady, commanding footsteps of Richard Anderson, the CEO. The air seemed to change whenever he appeared. Conversations quieted. Employees straightened their postures. Even the security guards stood taller. Richard Anderson was a man who carried authority effortlessly. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored navy suit that looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. He was everything people imagined when they thought of a billionaire CEO. His silver hair was perfectly combed back, his tie perfectly aligned, and his sharp gaze made employees feel like he could see straight through them. This morning, he was heading out for an important meeting. Everyone knew it. He moved with purpose, descending the staircase with his leather briefcase in hand. As he reached the lobby, the black car outside seemed to come alive, the driver rushing to open the back door. "Mr. Anderson, your ride," the man said smoothly, his voice practiced but a little too eager. The moment of tension. Employees watched with admiration. "Look at that," one whispered. "Even his car looks like power." Mr. Anderson didn't question it. To him, it was just another ride, another meeting, another day. He walked toward the open door, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Marcus's pulse quickened. Something was wrong. The driver's hand shook slightly as he held the door. His eyes flicked nervously toward Marcus for the briefest moment before darting away. It was subtle, but Marcus caught it. His mop froze mid-swipe. His breath caught in his chest. Every instinct screamed, "Don't let him get in that car." But how could he say something? He was just a janitor. If he spoke up and was wrong, he'd look insane. Worse, he could lose the only job keeping him and his daughter afloat. The seconds dragged on. The CEO was only a step away from the car. The crowd of employees held their breath, waiting to see him slide gracefully into the vehicle. Inside Marcus's mind, two voices battled. One whispered fear. "Stay quiet. It's not your place. Don't risk it." The other shouted louder, "What if something happens? What if you could have stopped it? What would Lila think if you stayed silent?" Marcus remembered the drawing his daughter had given him that morning, the one tucked safely in his pocket, the stick figures holding hands, the words, "My hero." And in that instant, the decision was made. The shout. His voice tore through the lobby, louder than he had ever spoken in his life. "Stop. Don't get in that car." The sound was so sudden, so forceful, that everyone froze. The CEO stopped mid-step, his hand hovering over the car door handle. His head turned sharply, eyes narrowing as he looked back toward Marcus. The lobby erupted into gasps. Did the janitor really just shout at the CEO? Phones came out. Employees exchanged horrified looks. Security tensed, unsure whether to remove Marcus immediately. But Marcus didn't waver. His finger was pointed straight at the car, his face stern, his eyes filled with conviction. Inside, his heart pounded like a drum. His palms were sweaty. A part of him wanted to run. But another part, the stronger part, knew he couldn't back down now. And that was the moment when a janitor, overlooked and underestimated, dared to challenge everything, risking his job and his future. The moment that would change not only his life, but the life of the CEO and the entire company. Because while the employees saw just another car, Marcus saw danger, and he was about to be proven right. Before Marcus Carter was a man who shouted in the middle of a billion-dollar lobby. He was just the janitor. Most people barely noticed him. He was a quiet figure pushing his cleaning cart down the endless hallways of Anderson Enterprises. He was the man sweeping floors when everyone else was heading home. He was the one polishing the windows while executives in tailored suits rushed past without even making eye contact. To them, he was invisible. But Marcus's life story was far from ordinary. He was a single father, a man carrying the weight of two roles, mother and father, provider and protector. Life had not been kind to him, but he had learned to stand tall in the face of hardship. His past. Years ago, Marcus had been a young man with big dreams. Growing up in a tough neighborhood, he had promised himself he would build a better life. He studied hard, played basketball at the local courts, and dreamed of becoming a police officer. He wanted to serve, to protect, and to stand for what was right. But life had other plans. Marcus met Angela, a woman whose smile could light up the darkest day. They married young, and soon after, their daughter, Lila, was born. For a while, everything seemed perfect. He had a family he adored, and he was determined to make them proud. Then came the day that shattered his world. Angela fell ill, a sudden, aggressive sickness that doctors couldn't stop. Marcus watched helplessly as the love of his life slipped away. He was left with hospital bills, grief that crushed his spirit, and a little girl who still needed bedtime stories and warm breakfasts. At just 28, Marcus was a widower, holding his daughter's hand at a funeral when he should have been planning family vacations. The struggles of a single father. Raising Lila alone was not easy. She was only 3 years old when Angela passed, too young to understand why her mother never came home again. Marcus became her whole world. The one who braided her hair, packed her lunch, walked her to school, and stayed up late sewing her Halloween costumes by hand. Money was always tight. He had applied for law enforcement positions, security jobs, and anything that paid more, but without the right connections, and with a schedule limited by childcare, opportunities slipped through his fingers. So he took the job at Anderson Enterprises, a janitor position. It wasn't glamorous. The pay wasn't much, but it was steady. It put food on the table, kept the lights on, and most importantly, it allowed him to take care of Lila. Marcus told himself every day, "This uniform doesn't define me. What defines me is how I raise my daughter." How others saw him. In the towering skyscraper of Anderson Enterprises, Marcus blended into background. Executives barely nodded when he passed. Some employees even avoided eye contact, treating him as though he wasn't part of the company at all. But Marcus didn't mind. He wasn't there for recognition. He was there for Lila. Still, every now and then, he overheard whispers. "He's just a janitor. Poor guy." Imagine working here and not being part of the real business. Marcus let those words roll off his back. What they didn't know was that when he left the building at night, he went home to a little girl who ran into his arms, screaming "Daddy," as though he were the most important man in the world. His relationship with Lila. Lila was Marcus's anchor. She was 10 years old now, curious, bright, and full of questions about the world. She loved drawing, reading mystery books, and eating her dad's famous homemade pancakes. Every night, after Marcus finished his late shift, he would tuck her into bed and tell her stories. Sometimes they were fairy tales. Sometimes they were real stories from his own life. But he always ended them with the same lesson. No matter how hard life gets, baby, you always do the right thing, even if it's scary, even if no one believes in you. To Lila, her dad wasn't Janitor. He was her hero, his keen instincts. What most people didn't realize was that Marcus was observant, extremely observant. While others walked past him without notice, Marcus noticed everything. Which employees were nervous before meetings, which security guards cut corners, which deliveries looked out of place. Cleaning the lobby gave him a front row seat to human behavior, and over the years, he developed a sharp eye for details others ignored. It was the same instinct that helped him spot when Lila was upset before she said a word. The same instinct that made him step in when kids on the block were bullying a smaller boy. And it was the very instinct that would soon change his life forever in the lobby of Anderson Enterprises. The day that prepared him. That morning had started like any other. Marcus kissed Lila goodbye at school, promising her he'd be home for dinner. She had handed him a small drawing she made in art class, a stick figure of her holding his hand with the words "My Hero" written above it. He had tucked it carefully into his pocket before heading to work. He didn't know then how important those words would be. By the time he reached the lobby of Anderson Enterprises, he was already in work mode, pushing his cart, humming a quiet tune, and nodding at the receptionist. To everyone else, it was an ordinary day. But to Marcus, something felt off. A black luxury car idling outside, a driver with darting eyes, a feeling deep in his gut that screamed danger. That was the moment everything changed. A man the company barely noticed was about to step into the spotlight. A janitor, ignored by executives, overlooked by employees, underestimated by nearly everyone, was about to prove that sometimes the most important person in the room is the one nobody's watching. And as Marcus opened his mouth to shout those unforgettable words that would echo in that lobby for years to come, he thought of his daughter's drawing. My hero. For the first time, Marcus realized fate was giving him a chance to live up to that title.